I'm starting to think it's impossible for the FIA to go 1 week without doing something that's getting everybody talking. Because a couple of weeks ago, at least, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, I did 2 videos in 1 week about the FIA. And I do themed videos every so often, particularly around the big races, but the FIA can't stay away from the controversy at the minute. Like I said, I think it was last week or the week before, I did 2 videos with all things FIA president, because Mohammed Ben Sulayem was making vox pops to the media about this, that and the other, and how things are going behind the scenes. Because in the last few months we've seen a lot of changes at the FIA that seem completely pointless. So let's have a quick recap then. In mid-November 2024, Niels Wittek, the race director, left his post with immediate effect. The FIA said that he'd stepped down to pursue other opportunities, something I compared to the bog-standard generic local band statement that you see get put up on Facebook, about how the bassist has left to pursue other projects and the band wishes that person well with their future endeavours. That same old cut and paste thing you see so often that those kinds of statements don't mean much anymore. A lot like how all those statements from the teams read pretty much the same during the Susie Wolff scandal that wasn't actually a scandal. But Wittek hadn't stepped down, he'd been sacked. And he told the German outlet Motorsport magazine that he hadn't resigned, and he'd been told he'd been sacked just a few hours before the FIA issued that statement saying that he'd left to pursue these other opportunities. And it was all a bit weird, because Wittek had been let go with just 3 races or so left in the season, and the reins would be handed over to F2 race director Rui Marquez. But it didn't stop there, because Marquez's replacement in Jeanette Tan was sacked before she even had the opportunity to start her new job as the F2 race director in Qatar, not this weekend just gone, but the weekend before. The plan was she would do the final F2 rounds in Qatar and Abu Dhabi and then be full-time next year. But her dismissal just days before her duties were about to start meant that Marquez had to take on the role of race director for Formula 1 and Formula 2 in Qatar and Abu Dhabi. A role that not even Charlie Whiting wanted to do because he said the workload was too high. And it's thought that doing double duty and just having that high workload led to what happened with that wing mirror at the Qatar Grand Prix. But on top of this, Sulayem has been sacking stewards by text. One of the FIA's most experienced stewards in Teddy Mayer was dumped after the Brazilian Grand Prix, after which he went and spoke to the BBC saying that the FIA was running out of people to do the jobs as they keep getting moved around or removed entirely, and the FIA is losing people much faster than they can train new ones up. Michael Masi, Jeanette Tan, Niels Wittek and Eduardo Freitas have all been involved with Formula 1 and Formula 2, to then not be involved with Formula 1 or Formula 2. And Freitas, the current WEC race director, left after an investigation into the Japanese Grand Prix in 2022, I think it was. This being where a recovery vehicle was sent out onto the track to retrieve Carlos Sainz's car while the session was still live. There was no red flag or anything else to try and slow the cars down properly. Even though the FOM feed didn't actually show the pictures of this whole thing live, the screenshots from the roll hoop cameras and footage from those cameras ended up going on social media. So between almost running out of staff and other bits and pieces, what else has been going on? Because, well, it can't carry on like this, can it? Well, it can, because at the time of writing we are just hours, if not minutes away from a vote going through the FIA's General Assembly that will change the way things are run. Instead of a meeting in Paris, the Assembly will be meeting in Rwanda, which is also where the FIA prize-giving ceremony will take place, and also where Verstappen will be doing his community service. This vote will decide whether or not the control of the Ethics and Audit Committees will be reduced, and end up handing more power to the FIA President and the President of the FIA Senate, instead of having the powers in the hands of the Senate itself and the FIA's compliance officers. On top of this, it will remove the powers of the Audit Committee to investigate financial matters. And halfway through the edit, they voted it through. As Autosport explained, this vote comes after President Mohammed Ben Sulayem was investigated and then later cleared of any wrongdoing when somebody in the FIA claimed that he'd interfered in the outcome of the 2023 Saudi Grand Prix. What was alleged to have happened is that Sulayem, again allegedly, made a phone call to the Vice President for Sport for the Middle East and North Africa region, a man called Sheikh Abdullah bin Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa, and if I messed that up I do apologise, and said that in no uncertain terms, Alonso must not be penalised. Fernando had been given a 10-second penalty because while he was serving a 5-second penalty for being outside of his grid box at the start, the Aston Martin mechanics had touched his car while he was serving that penalty, so they added another 5 seconds onto him. The BBC reported back in March that this report, which had been put together by Paolo Bassari, said that the whistleblower had told the FIA's ethics committee Ben Sulayem pretended the stewards to overturn their decision to issue the penalty to Alonso. The BBC makes clear that the word pretended in this case is derived from the Italian word pretendere, which means require or expect. If Alonso was to serve this penalty, he would have dropped from 3rd down to 4th, and Russell would have been promoted up in his place. Without the penalty, Alonso would have stayed in 3rd, and there was a conspiracy about all of it given that Aston Martin's title sponsor, well, one of them at least, is the Saudi state-owned oil company, Aramco. But with this new vote, it's got the attention of several people at the FIA who think that this is a bad idea. Dave Richards, who is the chairman of Motorsport UK and has also been in Formula 1 with the likes of Benetton and BAR, as well as being the ProDrive boss when Colin McRae and Richard Burns won their WRC titles, has been urging the FIA to rethink this whole process. Being the head of one of the member organisations of the FIA, Richards has voting power in the FIA, and he told the BBC that he was concerned that major organisations around the world would refuse to work with the FIA if they see that the President and the President of the Senate can just go, "Nah, you can't do that, it has to go through the Senate. I am the Senate." He followed that up with a statement to The Race that said, "Hopefully people will realise that this is not the right direction to take and that we need to make sure the FIA upholds the very best of sporting governance in the world. I'm hopeful that that will be the case. I'm hopeful it's just an oversight and people have not fully understood the consequences of this and we can correct it before it changes." And these proposals come at the end of a year where the president of the FIA was under investigation for several things finance related. So a lot of people are looking at this with a lot of skepticism because everything just seems to tie in very nicely. Sulayem's private office was under investigation earlier this year when a $1.5 million President's Fund was set up to pay the member clubs who vote for the president in the elections, with one such election due to happen next year as it so happens. This fund was never set up, it has to be said, and this fund has a lot of people online saying that this is corruption, it's bribery, it's trying to consolidate power, and so on and so forth. But it seems that this whole thing about reorganising things so that the President and the President of the Senate have more power is the bit that seems to be rubbing people the wrong way, more than anything else that's happened this year. It basically means that if anything comes up that is a matter of ethics, the ethics committee has to get approval from above them first, rather than sorting it out themselves. The BBC explains it a little bit better. What happens is, let's say there's been an allegation of something by someone. It doesn't matter what or who is involved, I'll allow you to make up some sort of fanfiction in your head. What the ethics committee would do at this point is they will do an initial report to determine whether or not they need to proceed. And if you watch Law and Order or 24 Hours in Police Custody or Police Cop Interceptor Bodycam Squad or any of these kinds of TV shows, the District Attorney on Law and Order or the Crown Prosecution Service here in the UK will determine whether or not the person that's been arrested and charged will have to go to court to answer to the alleged crimes. So basically, is there enough evidence here to do an investigation? We might find nothing, but there's a probability that we will find something, and if we don't investigate and there was something, then we're going to look like idiots. At the same time, they have to think, right, there's nothing here to investigate, so we won't bother investigating, like with the Susie Wolf stuff. So that's how they would normally operate. But if this vote goes ahead, and just to stress, at the time of writing it has not gone ahead, so by the time this video goes up, the vote might have gone through. So as always with these sorts of videos, you might have to move some words around. But if the vote goes in favour of doing all of this, it means that it won't be the Ethics Committee approving the investigations. It will be the President of the Senate approving the investigation, or the President of the FIA, which has opened up this whole conflict of interest thing. Because, as some of you might have already figured out, it means that the President of the Senate can deny something that might actually mean that somebody gets in trouble. There has been a clause that has been added into this. If the President of the FIA himself is being investigated, then it's the President of the Senate that approves the investigation. If it's the President of the Senate or anybody else in the Senate, it's the President of the FIA that approves the investigation. But for a lot of people, that hasn't made it any better. And it's not just Dave Richards who has voiced concerns. The head of Austria's Motorsport Federation has also come out and talked to the BBC about these proposed changes that will, effectively, reduce accountability within the FIA. Oliver Schmerald, who runs the OAMTC, reckons that this vote will go ahead, and he reiterates Richard's concerns that the FIA would be questioned by other international bodies about how they run things. And with FIFA constantly under the microscope with previous allegations of corruption, particularly around the handling of the 2022 World Cup when they awarded that to Qatar, the FIA might end up with that same reputation, one where the fans lose complete trust in the organisation that runs their favourite sport. Schmerald has also added that this is the second time in 6 months he has voiced concerns about planned changes within the FIA that will, like this vote, change how accountability is handled. At the last General Assembly in Samarkand in Uzbekistan, the General Assembly had voted on something called the urgency rule. The BBC explained this rule as granting the FIA president the power to impose changes through a group made up of the president of the FIA Senate and one member of his choosing from each of the 2 World Councils, one council for motorsport and one council for mobility. In particular, when circumstances do not permit a meeting of the Senate, especially in the event of urgent and/or critical situations. What it would mean is this small group of handpicked individuals would only have to communicate their decision, which would be the final decision, to the Senate, instead of taking it to the Senate for the Senate to then vote on it. And Schmerald, among others, like fans and Dave Richards as well, have kind of been hinting that this is moving towards a dictatorship within the FIA. Because with the departments that I've mentioned over the course of this video, a lot of the people who were there at the start of the year are no longer there. The Chief Executive Officer for the FIA, Natalie Robin, left the FIA after she raised questions about the general governance of the organisation. And she was the 4th senior executive to leave since December last year, so this happened in April, I think. Steve Nielsen, Tim Goss and Deborah Mayer resigned from their positions as Sporting Director, Single Seat Technical Officer and Commission for Women Head respectively back in May. The head of the Audit Committee, Bertrand Badra, and committee member Tom Purvis were sacked after the investigation into the finances. Paolo Bassari, the man who wrote the report that cleared President Soliem of wrongdoing at the 2023 Saudi Grand Prix, was also sacked at the conclusion of that respective investigation. The BBC noted that in just this year alone, the FIA lost its sporting director, F1 technical director, CEO, digital director, head of commercial legal affairs, governance and regulatory director, 2 race directors, a leading steward, a deputy steward, the head of the Women in Motorsport Commission, the Secretary General of Mobility, and the Director of Communications. But, in the interests of balance, the FIA hasn't responded to the BBC or Autosport's request for comment, but the head of legal affairs in Paul O'Dowd did respond to Schmerald's objections when he raised them initially on Tuesday this week, so that's the 11th of December 2024. O'Dowd said the answer of the president and the head of legal was that in order to protect the identity of individuals who might be subject to investigation from being published to a wider audience, it needed to be kept to a very close group. Their argument goes that not sharing reports of the Ethics Committee with the full Senate protects the individuals from being displayed to a broader public, whoever might be the subject of an investigation. But Schmerald doesn't agree with that line at all, saying, along with Richards, that the Ethics Committee must be properly independent, and a strong link between Soliem and Senate President Carmelo Sanz de Barros means that the Ethics Committee won't be independent, because 2 people, not 16 people, will be responsible for all of that control. But does this have a knock-on effect into other things as well? Because, as some might not be aware, the FIA regulates Formula 1 and FOM, or Liberty Media, whatever you want to call it, does the commercial side of things. They put it on the telly, they sign up new tracks to be on the calendar and all of that stuff, with Stefano Domenicali being basically the Bernie of the modern era. Well, in name only, that is. But as it stands, the FIA and FOM have stayed out of each other's way. Soliem hasn't got involved in the commercial side, and Domenicali hasn't stepped on the feet of the FIA, especially with the new rules coming in for 2026. They have, however, had differing opinions on things because Domenicali wants 10 teams and 24 races, but Soliem wants more cars on the grid and fewer races, which is probably the only thing anybody has ever agreed with Soliem on. Now, the last time I said that, people were saying, why do you want fewer races? Find me a good reason for having fewer races. But when I've had messages sent to me from recently resigned F1 mechanics telling me some of the stuff that happens behind the scenes and saying thank you for pointing this stuff out, and Verstappen as well has stood up for these mechanics, it's probably a good idea to cut down on the amount of travel. But that's another topic. But really, the difference in opinion with Suliem and Domenicali is the only real beef they've had with each other. And now with Andretti coming in for 2026, well, at least there's an acceptance in principle there, it looks like Suliem won that fight. Although now, it seemed that the beef was with Andretti, not GM. But we've covered that already. The thing is, there's a lot of shareholders involved with Formula 1 these days. Basically, there's a lot, and I mean a lot of money involved. Billions. But I just watched the final few seconds of one of the race's podcasts regarding this carnage at the FIA, and I don't think they mentioned what's going on today, but then again, it's the race, they might have a video up later. But in that podcast, they said that the season ending might do some of this some good. It means that between now and March, there won't be much need for FOM or Suliem to be in the news unless they decide to make some news. And it just allows everybody to just chill out, just detox themselves of Formula 1 and come back in 2025. But as Scott Mitchell-Malm said, if there's more to come, then the start of 2025 is going to be interesting. We've read quotes about F1 and the FIA needing strong leadership, which is correct, but the problem is it's more insecure leadership at the minute. Almost like the president wants an echo chamber. Shades of Balestri saying that the only good decision is my decision, and so on. But when you have so many people leaving, so many people getting sacked and then speaking out, along with the drivers pushing back, it makes you wonder how long this can go on. And actually, while we're here, the drivers have been pushing back on a number of things, and it's not just limited to Max getting punished for swearing or these other things that seem to be low on the list of things to sort, but somehow make their way to the top. In the last 24 hours or so, George Russell, the chairman of the Grand Prix Drivers Association, has suggested that with all the inconsistencies surrounding decisions and penalties from the stewards' offices, that maybe the rotating panel of stewards should be binned off and replaced by a professional team of stewards who actually get paid for their work, because as it stands, it's completely voluntary. And the stewarding stuff is something I've looked at before. Allegations of one particular steward being anti-my driver, and other allegations of a steward being too lenient on that same driver. The whole thing is never going to be perfect, although there is apparently going to be something done about the whole overtaking guidelines thing, to make it so that the loophole of, I made it to the apex first, give me room even though I've completely blown the corner myself, thing that Max has exploited so much over the last few years. Apparently, that's going to be eliminated and things will be a bit, well, I won't say fairer, but might reduce some of the chaos that comes with it because the same steward panel means consistency, at least on paper. The problem is, nobody wants to pay them. And Suliem has actually agreed with George on the whole permanent stewards thing, but he followed it with words to the effect of, if you want professional, you are paying for it. Because the player's paying the refs' salaries rather than the governing body, well, that's not a conflict of interest at all, is it? Does the NFL pay its referees, or do the teams pay the refs? Does the FA or FIFA pay the refs, or is it the teams? Do the guys on the World Snooker Tour pay the refs, or is it the WPBSA? The FIA generated around $2.5 billion in the first 3 months of 2024. I think they can spare £40,000 or £50,000 a year to pay for some highly qualified, highly intelligent stewards and somebody else to oversee them. It's bad enough that Real Madrid and Manchester United get or got accused of buying off referees. Don't make it spill into F1 as well. The fans at each other's throats are bad enough as it is. So, does Dave Richards or somebody else run for president in 2025? I don't know. Answers on a postcard, I guess. So then, a look at the latest piece of news regarding our friends at the FIA having a vote and how it might end up working if that vote goes through. If you have any opinions of your own, do leave them down in the designated comment submission zone under the video and get a discussion going. And if you've not already, like the video so I know I did a good job. If you're new here and enjoyed this piece, subscribe and get the bell on so you never miss out on anything else I do around here. As well as this, a massive thanks as ever go out to the mad lads at Patreon that keep supporting me at a more personal level. And if you want to help out around here, then a link to Patreon will be in the description, along with links to Discord, socials and other bits and pieces you might want or need to know. There's super thanks there if you just want to top up my coffee cup, and memberships for Patreon without the Patreon. So until next time, I've been Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.